So in Florida, a man has been sentenced to life in prison for stabbing his ex-girlfriend 32 times and leaving her for dead. It is just one more stark reminder during National Domestic Violence Awareness Month of what victims face at the hands of their abusers. And a new study out today by More magazine and the Verizon Foundation explores the connection between domestic violence and chronic illness. Nearly half of American women who responded say they've experienced some form of domestic violence, including physical, emotional, sexual, or economic abuse. And a startling 81% of them also have a chronic health condition like depression, diabetes, and asthma. Joining me now is Leslie Morgan-Steiner, a survivor of domestic violence, and Rose Stuckey-Kirk, president of the Verizon Foundation. Ladies, it's great to have you all here. Leslie, I want to start with you. And for those that are watching at home, I just want to point out, if you have kids in the room, that this is a sensitive topic. And so I just want to caution parents out there. But allegedly, your husband attacked you 5 days before your wedding, according to you, choking you and doing it so hard, leaving marks around your neck. You say you experienced everything from beatings to being thrown down the stairs. You even say that he threatened you with guns. So explain how you were able to get away from that situation and then go on to find the strength to be as outspoken as you are on your personal experience.
Well, you know, I was only in my early 20s when I was married, and it was a 4-year marriage, and I experienced really incredible physical violence during the marriage. And during the whole time, I never thought about the short-term damage. I was too focused on surviving, understandably, and getting out. And I ended that relationship over 20 years ago and rebuilt my life. I wrote a New York Times best-selling memoir, Crazy Love, about the experience. I did a TED Talk about relationship violence. And during that whole time, it never once occurred to me that I might be suffering from long-term physical damage due to the violence I experienced in my 20s, until I was contacted by More magazine and the Verizon Foundation for this incredibly important study.
Well, it would make sense that there is a PTSD aspect involved with all this. Rose, I know the survey that you all did found that 76% of women say they've never been asked about domestic violence during a medical exam. And I know you've pointed out you have a personal connection to domestic violence, so explain for us how you witnessed the connection between domestic violence and also chronic health issues.
Yeah, so my sister was absolutely a victim of domestic violence, and she suffered from a chronic health condition called sarcoidosis, which was exacerbated because the stress of that because of her, violent situation. And I think that it points to the fact that oftentimes victims of domestic violence, even years later, when they get out of that situation, are suffering chronic illnesses and chronic conditions that may not be related back to those incidents of violence, strangulation, and the impact that it has on really impacting your blood flow to your brain, which later on can cause short-term memory losses. So our emphasis here is on how do we train healthcare professionals to really focus on that linkage, and how do we get people who are victims to bring that forward to their health professionals to help them understand that that connection's there. You know,
obviously we're trying to bring awareness by having this conversation right now, also by having Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And Leslie, all those years ago during this experience, this failed marriage, this abusive marriage that you had, we didn't have the scale of conversations that we're having now, the connectivity that we can have between people who can share their stories and also share their strength and their hope. So can you explain from your perspective, did your healthcare provider ever ask you any questions about what you were going through? And do you feel now that with a connection being made, are you optimistic that this can be something that healthcare professionals will look at more?
I am extremely optimistic, especially because of research such as this study by More and Verizon. I was not asked at the time ever about whether I was a victim of domestic violence. And I think that if I had been asked, I might have been in so much denial that I couldn't have admitted it. But I'm really optimistic today because this is how we end relationship violence, by talking about it, by researching it, by studying it, by making sure that everybody from police officers to healthcare professionals to family court judges understands that one of the biggest traumas of relationship violence is the long-term physical effects that victims experience.
Well, and shame being such a large byproduct of any abuse survivor, and the act of actually admitting it is so hard for so many people to recognize themselves as being a victim and then trying to figure out how they can change their situation. Rose, as we look at the fight in Washington over health care, I want to point out, though, that the screening and counseling for domestic violence, they're covered under the ACA. So what do you say to certain Republican lawmakers that would want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, over the whole Obamacare situation?
You know, I don't necessarily have a message for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. My message is really about how do we take ownership of the fact that there is this relationship between domestic violence and chronic illnesses, that our practitioners need to be trained to screen for that so that people can lead healthy and fulfilled lives. And the work that we're doing with the Verizon Foundation extends into work with the Robert Wood Johnson organization to actually screen physicians so that we can teach people how to do it. So it really isn't about politics. It's really about the fact that intimate partner violence is real. 1 in 4 women will be a victim of domestic violence in her lifetime. And we have an obligation to make that connection between chronic illnesses and domestic violence and help people get the screening and the help that they need.
Men are also victims as well, so we want to point that out. But it's also about raising good people that aren't going to institute this kind of behavior on a loving partner.
You're absolutely right.
So that's another angle that we need to discuss as well. But I want to thank both of you. Rose for being here in front of me. Leslie, thank you for sharing your story and all of the work that you've been doing to forward the conversation. We appreciate it. Thanks, Rose.
Thank you.